In this video, we have a lot to unpackage because Trump has been planning this for a long time. He didn't just wake up one day and decide it's a good idea to start tariffing other countries. He's been thinking this way for the past few decades. Listen to this.
I couldn't believe this last auto deal as an example. Here we are, we're sitting there. It's restricted in Japan. Everything's restricted. We're sitting, they can't come in. And all of a sudden, this country folds. We do the old fold now. I've never seen it.
That isn't the way the press reported it.
Well, no.
The press reported it that we had a deal.
And then all of a sudden it turned out that the deal turned out that it was not a good deal for us. And we had all the cards. I mean, it's not like we didn't have the cards. It's like, keep your cars out of here until you open up. That's all. Keep your cars out. And then the first hour was like, oh, we made this wonderful deal. After about 15 seconds after that, people realized we got duped. I just don't understand it.
What's wrong with us? I mean, I guess they said, well, this would hurt American car dealers.
You know, what's wrong with us? I don't know. They're afraid politically to make a little bit of a tough stand. That wasn't even a tough one. That was a no-brainer. You would have had the Japanese cars out for 19 and a half seconds, and you would have won every single point. It's the most incredible failure in negotiation that I've seen. But it happens all the time. I just don't understand it. So I would take a much harder stand. I'd take a much more difficult stand, I would say. Make a couple of enemies. I think I'd make a lot of friends ultimately.
If the United States government took a firmer stand with foreign countries, would we be better off, or are we so much now a part of the nation of the community of nations that we can't really afford to offend anybody?
I think we'd be better off, and I think we'd be far more respected. I think the Japanese would respect us far more than they do. I don't think they have any respect for us, and they shouldn't have any respect for us because we are idiots when it comes to what's happening. I mean, look at dealing with Japan. I mean, just take a look at what's going on. I mean, they make hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and we lose money in deficits, and nothing happens. And they say, no, the Japanese are learning, and they're starting to open up. In the meantime, every second goes by, we're losing. I just think that people would have far greater respect for this country if we took a much tougher stand. It's really quite pathetic.
And so you guys are going to see a lot of things out there like breaking news headlines. Oil just crashed under $60 for the first time in 4 years. Trump's tariff tantrum is now dragging down global demand, gutting prices, sending shockwaves through the entire markets. But yeah, it's hilarious because people like this complain when gas is too high at the pump. Now oil drops, meaning the cheaper prices at the pump. And yet people are still going to complain. And if we go to tradingeconomics.com, you guys can see in 2022, the price of gasoline was $3.97 per gallon. And right now it's about $1.99 per gallon. So what do you want? Higher prices or lower prices? It's the same thing for the crypto market. The smartest investors in the world want prices to come lower so they can get better deals on their favorite altcoins. Because if altcoins are at all-time highs, and that's the only time that you're excited to buy, that's how you're going to stay poor forever. Because just use some common sense here, because common sense isn't so common anymore. Where did people make the most money investing in the stock market? Was it people who bought all the way up here at the top of the dot-com bubble boom by February of 2000 when the NASDAQ was upwards of 4,000? Or was it the people who were buying during these dips right here, like in 1988 when the NASDAQ was at 947, or buying this dip right here by March of 2000 before the markets rallied over 343%? Also, it was the people who were buying all the way down here at the bottom in 2002 when the markets bottomed out before recovering since then and bringing us to where we are today. So the real question is this pullback in the stock market similar to one of these pullbacks we went through in 1998 before the market rocketed to the upside for a blow off top and then the crash happened? Or is this pullback the start of something much bigger, setting us up for one of the largest bull traps in history to get people to buy back into the market, thinking it's going to make a recovery, similar to what happened right here by September of 2000, before the stock market plummeted to the downside and dropped over 83% from the peak, completely wiping out not just baby boomers, but everybody who bought in based on the fear of missing out in March of 2000. And how will this affect the crypto market? Because stocks and crypto are definitely correlated because they're risk on assets. And crypto arguably is affected even more just based on facts, because if we look at the percentage of pullback, crypto was down 37% by the 7th of April yesterday. And this is unusual because yesterday, politician Marjorie Taylor Greene said that people panicking over tariffs are losers and failures. Today, she disclosed over a dozen stock purchases, purchasing hundreds of thousands of numerous stocks. So she bought when the market was deeply red, buying stocks like Amazon, Dell, JP Morgan, Nike, UPS, and a wide variety of other stocks. So does she know something that retail doesn't know, or is she making the biggest mistake of her life, investing near the top? Now, you guys obviously know during a bear market, like what we went through from March of 2000 until October of 2002 for 2 years, it didn't just go straight down. There were recoveries along the way where you could have made money in the market. For example, this recovery right here lasted 98 days, where the market actually bounced 39% to the upside over the course of 3 months. And some other recoveries right here, like this one was 31% over 34 days. Then from the 2nd of April of 2001 until the 21st of May for about 49 days, the markets bounced 51%. Then from the 17th of September of 2001 until roughly the 10th of December for 84 days, the markets bounced another 57%. So if you know how to catch the markets when they make these recovery rallies during a bear market, it can actually be very profitable for you in the short term. Or if you're more of a macro market investor, then waiting a few years to be able to accumulate the bottom and then holding for a few years while the markets make a recovery on out of there was a really good retirement plan if you were financially endowed enough to have enough money to buy in September of 2002. Whereas most millennials were just too young. They were still in high school or junior high, have no money in their bank account to buy the stock market. So in my videos, I've talked about how it's too late for millennials and Gen Z to buy the stock market because we are on the verge of a very big crash. And even if the markets push to a new all-time high, I am expecting much deeper sell-offs to the downside, regardless of whatever Trump does, because he has been positioned as the next recession president. And his tariff moves are very bold because his goal is to get the Federal Reserve to drop interest rates and start quantitative easing again, adding to their balance sheet, because he said it himself that no one gets rich while rates are high. And in my video 3 days ago, I talked about how it's a setup and how Trump's ultimate goal is to sway these numbers right here on the CME watch group for the target rate possibilities for the next FOMC meeting, because it was at 70% 3 days ago for the Fed to keep rates steady for the next meeting coming up in about 28 days and 22 hours. And right now, look at this, guys. It has swayed from 70% to now 48% are expecting them to keep rates steady. 51% are expecting a rate cut. And depending on how much more volatility to the downside hits the market within the next 28 days, if we see further sell-off to the downside, these numbers will sway even higher in favor of a rate cut. So Trump is forcing Jerome Powell's hand to lower interest rates. And this is why the Federal Reserve announced a closed-door meeting on April 7th to discuss this. So Trump's reciprocal tariffs was very risky, but it's working. Oil prices are down. He's saying the slow-moving Fed should cut rates. Food prices are down. There is no inflation. In fact, if we go to trueflation.com, we're actually at 1.4%, down from 3% in December of 2024. So inflation is down. Trump is actually right here. There is no reason for the Fed to keep rates high right now. And the long-time abused USA is bringing in billions of dollars a week from these other countries on these tariffs that are already in place. Even though China is escalating the trade war by raising their tariffs even more, Trump is saying they've made enough for decades, taking advantage of the good old USA. Our past leaders are to blame for allowing this and so much else to happen to our country. Make America great again. Now, I don't agree with everything Trump says, but this one he is spot on, because most people want to blame him for the problems in the USA, but they don't realize that every single previous administration allowed the U.S. national debt to get to the point that it is today at almost $37 trillion. And the U.S. federal spending at $7 trillion, whereas the U.S. federal tax revenue at $5 trillion leaves a $2 trillion federal budget deficit that needs to make up for. So they're not bringing in enough money to pay the interest on the debt because the Treasury has over $7 trillion in debt to refinance in 2025 alone. And so if the Fed keeps interest rates high, it just means that the government is going to have to pay out more while bond yields are high. And because they're not bringing enough money in from the IRS and from taxes, well, they could either tax you more or they could tax other countries more. So what do you want? Do you want to pay more in taxes? Of course not. Nobody does. Would you rather have other countries pay more that have been abusing the USA for a while, even though in the short term it creates volatility in your portfolio? Of course you would, if you think long term. Now, if you think short term and you're paper hands and you're the type of person that, like Warren Buffett says, that sells just because something's down in the short term, then maybe you shouldn't be in these markets at all. But if you can think long term here because you know the future of the technology behind what you hold, then you, my friend, are going to be very successful long term. And watch what happens over the next few months, because over 50 countries have reached out to Trump to negotiate deals. So the countries that move first and that move fast are going to get the best deals. The ones that move last are going to be screwed.
I got a report from the USTR last night that more than 50 countries have reached out to the president to begin a negotiation. But they're doing that because they understand that they bear a lot of the tariff. And so I don't think that you're going to see a big effect on the consumer in the U.S. because I do think that the reason why we have a persistent long-run trade deficit is these people have very inelastic supply. They've been dumping goods into the country in order to create jobs, say, in China.
And so the reciprocal tariffs on these other countries aren't bad. The challenge here is when you allow other countries to take advantage of you for so long, they call it a good business deal. And then when you try and even the playing field, or even to half of a degree, because you guys could see the reciprocal tariffs, are somewhat half of what these other countries had on us, those countries then try and blame you and retaliate. So the irony here is hilarious. But this brings up a wild theory posted by All Things XRP. I'm curious on your guys' thoughts here about how this is a smokescreen for a global debt reset to set up and make XRP the new backbone of the international financial system. So it sounds insane, but he's saying it's more real than you think. So let's dive into this. And what the shadow agenda is here that has to deal with the Mar-a-Lago Accord. Buried in policy circles is a plan that proposes swapping U.S. debt for 100-year bonds, devaluing the dollar, triggering controlled inflation, and it's not economic policy, it's a soft reset. Many are calling it a smoking gun, where all eyes and attention are on tariffs, but this is really leverage for debt swaps. So here's the theory. Tariffs aren't about China or other countries. They're about U.S. creditors. Think Japan, think China, think the European Union, central banks holding $3.8 trillion in treasuries, using tariffs as pressure to force them into new debt terms, then flip the system. Now, what does that mean? Well, this is where XRP enters the chat. The U.S. is prepping for a global monetary reshuffle. It's going to need a neutral bridge currency, instant liquidity globally, something post-dollar collapse, but not hostile to other countries. So in other words, XRP, leading people to wonder if this was planned all along. So imagine this: weaken the dollar via tariffs, create inflation to devalue debt, force a global liquidity crisis, offer a solution using RippleNet plus XRP as the bridge, debt gets restructured, cross-border payments get digitized, XRP becomes the rails. And what's interesting about this is XRP was designed for this moment. Don't forget that Ripple has already partnered with 300 plus banks. A lot of those are central banks that Brad Garlinghouse disclosed. XRP's on-demand liquidity solves the exact problem a collapsing fiat system creates. The court wins are clearing the path with the Ripple versus SEC lawsuit. So what if XRP was never meant to compete with Bitcoin, but to completely take over SWIFT? And Trump's pro-crypto lean since he was inaugurated and discussed the strategic Bitcoin stockpile, a crypto reserve for ADA, XRP, and Solana is no coincidence here, guys. His 2024 campaign literally promised to make America a crypto leader and the crypto capital of the world. He's not a blockchain purist. He doesn't really know anything about blockchain. In fact, his Trump meme coin that crashed and burned, he didn't even know what he was doing. Developers created that for him. What he is he's a deal maker. So love it or hate it, if XRP's utility helps solve a global debt reset as a win, then that's a deal he'd absolutely take because he's known for making bold moves. Because Wall Street is already spooked. On April 3rd, the markets panicked. The S&P dropped 5%. And since then, you guys saw at the beginning of this video how much it's dropped. Bond volatility spiked. Dollar weakness accelerated. Since January 13th of this year, the DXY, the US dollar currency index, dropped about 8%. So it's going to take time for the reshuffling to occur because a global reserve currency roughly takes on average about 80 to 100 years to shift from a leading world power to another world power. And the US dollar is around year 80. So it's no coincidence that blockchain is becoming the topic of conversation in the news, why Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, which is the same name as Dogecoin, was created to uncover corruption in the government, and smart money is looking for off-ramps from the fiat system. Is XRP that off-ramp? So rather than just writing this off as a crazy conspiracy theory, we all need to think much bigger here. This isn't just about crypto here. This is about ending the petrodollar era, resetting global debt, establishing neutral financial infrastructure, eroding fiat trust just enough to make digital rails inevitable, planting seeds of the unconscious of the masses through the Department of Government Efficiency that we can't trust the government because of how much federal spending there is, of how big the deficit is, of how much money the Department of Government Efficiency has uncovered of fraud. And what could be the solution? Well, how about a ledger that tracks and records every single transaction in real time, like the XRP ledger? So what if XRP was always the end game? Crazy, right? But it was also crazy to believe that in 1971, the dollar was going to be removed from the gold standard and quantitative easing was going to send us to nearly $37 trillion in debt. So this is about XRP replacing the US plumbing, the pipes, not the store.